What are the visible signs that climate change is affecting water availability?
So if we look at climate change as a whole, there are different trends across the country. So for example, if we look at temperature, that's usually the first one that comes up, is that temperatures are increasing, and that obviously has an impact on overall climate as well. If we look at current rainfall, the predictions are that the western side of the country will become more dry, and on the east, whether it be KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, Limpopo areas, and the northeast, we are seeing an increase in rainfall. So the easiest type of scenarios to try and explain climate change and its effects on water availability is to look at the extremes that we are currently facing in the country, whether it be ongoing droughts or whether it be a complete bombardment of torrential rain that is causing floods within the south, and then even we had in the northeast at the beginning of the year.
Hello and welcome to Africa Within, the podcast where we explore the issues, innovations, and ideas shaping Africa's future and the lives of its people. I'm your host, Nontobeko Mlambo, and today we are diving into a topic that affects every one of us, which is water. I think we can all agree that water is life, and then it is the most fundamental resource on earth. We cannot survive without it, we cannot build communities without it, and we certainly cannot secure a future without it. But in this country of South Africa, whether you're from the township or you're from the suburbs, the rural villages or a growing city, lots and lots of people are facing the very real threat of an insufficient supply, sometimes no access to safe, clean water at all. To help us unpack these challenges, I'm joined by Professor Anja du Plessis, a research specialist in water resource management. Professor du Plessis has extensive expertise in water availability, use and demand, water quality and pollution, water governance, sanitation services delivery, and water security. In this episode, we explore the extent of South Africa's water challenges and what is driving them. We also speak about the risks these shortages pose on ordinary South Africans, particularly the most vulnerable, and what it means for public health when water becomes scarce and unsafe. And we also look ahead, examining the emerging technologies and AI-driven solutions that could help us manage, protect, and sustain our water shortages for generations to come. So please do stick around for this insightful conversation. All right, thank you so much, Professor du Plessis, for being here. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do and who you are?
I'm Professor Anja du Plessis. I'm a water management expert and also an associate prof from the University of South Africa. My background is basically environmental management, environmental science, with specific focus on water resource management in South Africa and then at large as well.
So my first question is, we know that water a human need and a fundamental resource essential to our existence. But South Africa is currently facing significant water challenges. This has gone on for so many years. What is the current situation in South Africa regarding water availability?
Okay, so first of all, South Africa is a water scarce country. I'm sure you've heard that from various departments, especially the Department of Water and Sanitation. If we look at our water availability, we are ranked among the top 30th driest countries globally, facing severe and persistent water crisis characterized by, like in Joburg, aging infrastructure, climate change induced droughts, and then also the floods that we are seeing in the Eastern Cape, the floods that we saw in Mpumalanga and Limpopo at the beginning of the year. And then also we're looking at supply shortages overall. What we do know is that while our metros have a 97% of access to tap water, roughly 20% of the national population, particularly in our rural areas, are facing inadequate, unsafe, and interrupted supply. So if we look at the situation as a whole, we are seeing infrastructure failures, water scarcity in terms of availability, but we also need to look at quality, because if your water is too dirty to use, that creates water scarcity as well. Then if we look at water access, there's major disparities about that all over the country, and then also seeing persistent shortages, like the recent drought that we saw in the Eastern Cape, with especially with Knysna as well, facing day zero in like 11 days. But I saw that the Kruger and the Impofu Dam in the Eastern Cape are for once in 11 years, I think, actually full and overflowing.
Okay, considering all the things that you've mentioned as the challenges, what is really behind the water challenges? Is it one thing? Is it many other things that are combined that makes it very hard for everyone to be able to access water?
Yes, so when we're looking at the water scenario as a whole, what we are seeing is that there are context-specific water crises. So in some areas, you will find that they're within a drought, they don't have water available. In other areas, you see they have an abundance of water, especially on our East Coast. But the primarily contributing factors are obviously our climate, that's semi-arid. We also need to look at other human factors like the lack of maintenance. Inadequate maintenance of water infrastructure have led to major water leaks and then contamination as well. So we need to remember that despite, let's say, for the integrated Vaal River system being above 100%, there are still communities within the Johannesburg city that their taps are still being dry after 54 days or something during this year. We also need to look at climate change, which induces droughts, but then also floods. And then the growing demand is placing more and more pressure on our available water supply. Hence, all of our experts calling for a change in behavior, because in some instances, those that do have a lot of water are not using it responsibly, and we need to try and increase our water efficiency use at the end of the day.
Why are so many municipalities unable to deliver reliable water and sanitation services? What are the
Well, at
challenges?
Well, at this point, what we are seeing is the lack of maintenance, financial instability, political interference. There are so many factors within our municipal structure that have contributed to the situation where we are now. The city of Johannesburg is once again a very good example, especially with the past week, the finance minister issuing a scathing letter to the mayor of Johannesburg, saying basically that the budget that they submitted is unfunded. And what this has caused is a widespread disruption of services, especially your water and sanitation, basically meaning that the Joburg Water is unable to do the necessary maintenance that it needs to. We also look at, as I said, our finances, as well as political instability right across the country. And what we've also seen is a lack of skills. There needs to be specialized skills within a municipality for it to actually function properly. Hence, this is why the government is also now looking at municipal reform. What do we need to do better? And one of the reforms will be within the finance sphere, where they're going to implement the ring fencing of funds. It is a bit of a contested issue, especially on municipal level, but that's the only way that we will be able to force municipalities to take the revenue that you did collect from your water and sanitation back into the maintenance of infrastructure so that they can actually deliver a service to the communities.
Hmm. Earlier, you spoke about quality water, the importance of having quality water, not just water that is available, but it must be quality. And now you
Yeah.
just mentioned the maintenance. So obviously, if the infrastructure is not maintained properly, the water can't be safe. How safe is drinking water in South Africa?
Well, as a rule, if we look at our big cities like the city of Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, and eThekwini, the tap water in itself is mostly safe. You have a continuous supply of water, the pressure in the pipes as well prevent contaminants from entering the pipeline. But one needs to consider that that pipeline is then maintained. What we have seen in some communities within the city of Joburg, like Poseidon Oaks Valley, they experienced drinking water contamination due to a leaking pipe and a leaking sewer line, which obviously contaminated the water quality. So the city of Johannesburg needed to shut down. They had to flush the system, try to find out where the source is. So in certain instances within our big cities, the the water quality might not be of sufficient standard, but the city is responsible to flush out the system, ensure that there's a notice for everyone to communicate this. If we look at our rural communities, that is a completely different scenario where most communities are dependent on water tanks. And as we know, water tanks can be contaminated quite easily. And this usually then leads to various water-related diseases that communities can obtain, like cholera. I mean, Hammanskraal is still one of the most pertinent examples of what happens when communities are not given safe drinking water. So, as a rule, what we do say is that, especially in South Africa, with the major sewage problems that we are facing due to our dilapidated wastewater treatment works, is as a rule, one should never use raw water for drinking water purposes because the chances of people getting ill is quite high.
You just spoke of cholera outbreaks. So in some communities, especially in townships and in places like you just mentioned, Hammanskraal, sometimes the sewage will spill into the road and sometimes it spills to the rivers. What risks does it pose for an ordinary person's health in their daily life?
Well, if we look at that as a whole, again, it creates severe public health crisis and significantly degrades people's daily life. If you can imagine, you are surrounded by sewage, and I do know that in some instances with the communities, when there is a sewer spillage or overflow, in some instances it even flows through people's homes. So I can only imagine what they need to go through on a daily basis. The smell, it affects you. It's obviously got severe health risks. We look at the waterborne diseases. That's usually due to fecal matter in the drinking water itself. That causes cholera, typhoid fever, diarrhea, dysentery, hepatitis A, major waterborne diseases that we're looking at. Then also it can, if people do experience the ingestion of these contaminants, that will also then lead to stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, skin and eye infections, even respiratory issues due to the pungent stench and the decaying waste that they experience. Antibiotic resistant infections. What some studies have found is that sewage polluted rivers contain pathogens resistant to antibiotics, making infections very difficult to treat. So if we go on with the current trend that we are, these types of public health crises will be increasing. And we also are going to see environmental and long-term hazards like groundwater contamination, pest and disease factors, and then also eutrophication. Very good example of eutrophication is the Hartbeespoort Dam, and that's primarily due to the upper catchment being dominated by the inflow of raw wastewater or impartially treated wastewater, contributing to a complete nutrient overload where some instances fish are dying due to a decrease in oxygen in the water column, and then also affecting people's health as well.
We often hear that our constitution is one of the best in the world, and I know that South Africa has strong water laws on paper, primarily governed by the constitution. These include the National Act 36 of 1998 for resources management and the Water Services Act 108 of 1997 for delivery. Why is implementing such a challenge?
Well, once again, it's completely and really multifaceted. When we do look at the legislation themselves, previous criticism is that it is too fragmented. Other negatives about it that's been highlighted in academia and in research is that often the policies are unworkable and impractical. Um, it also highlights the appropriate and systemic policies might not be effective on operational levels as either. Other factors that contribute to the problem in implementation is that in some instances there's a constraint of adequate financial resources. We are seeing that the implementation of our water laws are also hindered by, in some instances, excessive government involvement, administrative control, outdated institutional arrangement, and then the primary thing is the fragmentation and the poorly coordination of water administration. So even if we do have the laws, unfortunately, what we are seeing is poor implementation, whether that be, resources, human capital, etc. There are so many things that are hindering the implementation of our water legislation, and that's one of the reasons why we are seeing reform and amendments to the Water Services Act, but also now hopefully this will be gone through the amended National Water Act should be gone through Parliament by the mid of this year.
Earlier on, you spoke about how climate change is already affecting how the water situation is in our country. How is it already affecting the water that reaches our taps every day?
Well, this year we've been seeing extremes from the one to the next. If we look at what happened in Limpopo as well as Mpumalanga when they received excessive amounts of rainfall within a week, the way that that affects water security, especially water getting to people's taps, is due to the destruction of infrastructure. There were major damages done to the infrastructure, and what happened then was whether it be affecting the pumps, whether it be affecting the pipelines, we did see a major delay in the recovery of actual drinking water. They had to fix the pipelines, they had to fix the drained pump stations, etc. So it's a big effect, not just whether it's dry. When it floods as well, we do see a lot of damage of our water infrastructure. And then also, if we go down to the south at the beginning of this year, with Knysna facing a day zero, mostly due to the below average rainfall that the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape and the southern areas have experienced. But now again, we're seeing the complete extreme again with Knysna and the Garden Route and the Eastern Cape being hammered currently as we speak. And what I am seeing happening once again is the destruction of infrastructure. And that will then basically cause a delay in people getting drinking water of a suitable standard if the infrastructure was affected. So it affects communities in various ways, but it mostly affects those communities that are rural and vulnerable, because there isn't a lot of things that they can do to try and adapt and become more resilient if they are dependent on these types of infrastructures.
Yeah, you just mentioned it affects even people in the rural areas, and the issue of climate change sometimes is very hard to explain. So, what are the visible signs that climate change is affecting water availability?
So if we look at climate change as a whole, there are different trends across the country. So for example, if we look at temperature, that's usually the first one that comes up, is that temperatures are increasing, and that obviously has an impact on overall climate as well. If we look at current rainfall, the predictions are that the western side of the country will become more dry, and on the east, whether it be KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, Limpopo areas, and the northeast, we are seeing an increase in rainfall. So the easiest type of scenarios to try and explain climate change and its effects on water availability is to look at the extremes that we are currently facing in the country, whether it be ongoing droughts or whether it be a complete bombardment of torrential rain that is causing floods within the south, and then even we had in the northeast at the beginning of the year.
You spoke about rainfall. Does it help the situation? And how much rainfall does the country get? And how do these patterns affect the state of water in our country?
So if we look at our average annual rainfall, we do receive between 460 to just below 500 millimeters a year, and that's quite significantly lower than the global average. The global average is roughly 850 to 950 millimeters per year. And this is why South Africa is basically classified as a water scarce country, because we do receive below average rainfall, even though it might not look at it like it at this point in time. But what we do see with rainfall patterns is that there is a high variability and extreme events like we're seeing now, and it is heavily influenced by changing climate systems. So rainfall patterns, what we can primarily see within the country is that we do have summer rainfall region, which is the majority of the country, and then in the Western Cape area, we see winter rainfall. We also need to look at the effects that these have on our state of water infrastructure and then also the availability. And what we are seeing is an increase in flood risk. As I said, infrastructure damage. We are seeing localized drought and water scarcity, whether it be in the Limpopo province or like we saw in the Western Cape. We're also seeing unpredictable agricultural impacts, whether it is crops getting damaged by extreme storms, especially those containing high winds and hail. Then you have the other extreme where no rainfall falls, they're experiencing a below average rainfall period. Then in terms of the availability, it affects our dam levels and our groundwater. And then we are also seeing an effect on water quality. It's the combination of erratic rainfall and high evaporation rates. Plus, then adding to that, your aging infrastructure that's prone to fail during floods is ultimately reducing the availability of clean drinking water. So just because there is a lot of water going around does not mean that that water can actually be used for various resources. So for purposes, whether it be agriculture, industries, etc., the water needs to be of a certain standard for us to use it. So you can say water, water everywhere, but it doesn't mean you have a drop to drink.
I often hear that we get some of our water from Lesotho. What water arrangement or relationships does South Africa have with the neighboring countries?
Well, as we know, South Africa manages its water resources through shared river basins and multiple bilateral or multilateral agreements. And that's, as you say, primarily it's neighboring countries. It includes Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe. And what we are basically seeing is that is usually done by the Southern African Development Community Protocol on Shared Watercourses. And some of the key structures include the Orange-Senku, Limcom and Limpopo, and then also in Komati, close to Mozambique. But the key water relationships that we do have is with Lesotho. Lesotho Highlands Water Project is the largest partnership, transferring water from Lesotho to South Africa, but the primarily purpose of that is to try and feed the economic hub in Gauteng. Then if we look at Eswatini and Mozambique, we also have agreements there that governs Maputo and Nkomati watercourses. Looking at Namibia and Botswana, we have the major water basin, this Orange Senku River, via the Oreisecom, that's what they call it, to handle water allocation, and also, very importantly, the ecological protection. And then obviously we also do have in the north, Zimbabwe and Mozambique through the Limpopo Watercourse Commission. So there's a lot of frameworks that South Africa uses with its neighboring countries, but it's basically to prioritize equitable and reasonable utilization of shared watercourses, basically adhering to regional but also international law regarding downstream water rights.
Okay, so with all these challenges that we have, what lessons can we learn from other countries that have faced similar water and sanitation challenges?
So the primary thing is to implement integrated water resource management. The key international successes show that sustainable solutions require combining infrastructure investment with behavioral change, technological innovation, and then obviously strong governance as well. If we look at integrated water resource management, which is implemented across the world, one needs to treat water as a scarce resource. For example, countries like Singapore and Israel have shown that managing water scarcity requires treating water as a finite, high-value asset, shifting your focus toward conservation and reuse. We also need to look at the nexus between water, energy, and food. They are all dependent on each other and affect each other also in different ways. We also need to look at unconventional water sources, like we are seeing within the Western Cape, utilizing wastewater recycling, desalination as well. Then we also need to look at infrastructure and technical solutions. The primarily thing within South Africa is to try and reduce your non-revenue water, and that includes water theft, vandalism, basically water leaking through a bucket with numerous holes in it in some cities in South Africa. We also need to look at nature-based solutions, smart technology. I do know that a lot of municipalities are looking at smart technology, whether it is addressing non-revenue water, whether it leak detection, or in some instances, our wastewater treatment works, we do have some that actually do work very well. And they have also looked at various smart technologies to try and implement real-time monitoring and improve management. And that's usually you see that in emerging economies. And then obviously we also need to address the crux of the problem, which is governance and finance. We need to look at proactive planning, transparent funding and tariffs, and then importantly as well, like we are seeing with the current trend in the country, is public-private partnerships, trying to do it in a collaborative way so that no one is being left behind.
You just mentioned smart technology. Is there an opportunity for things like AI to be used to try and solve some of these challenges?
Yes, yes, for sure. So with smart technology, what we usually see is that using the data plus then your artificial intelligence, smart biodigestive sanitation technologies. But what they do is you can build various models for various scenarios. AI can also assist you in that. And I do know that there are a lot of models that have been built with the help of AI. So what we will be seeing is using more data within the implementation of AI to try and improve overall efficiency, but also enable proactive planning. So we move away from reactive management to proactive at the end of the day. And yes, AI is going to play an increasing role.
So, what gives you confidence or hope that the situation will or can improve?
Well, as I said, we are currently looking at a combination of targeted structural reforms across the country, whether it be increased private sector involvement, and then also proactive technology driven management of our natural resources. That's what we are seeing. And we're also seeing the establishment of new specialized water agencies like the National Water Infrastructure water agency that has been recently established, basically looking at enhancing infrastructure while we're also looking at collaborative governance, including local, national, and private partnerships to try and address the systemic maintenance failures that we are seeing around the country. But the important thing is that change is happening, even if it is happening very slowly. The private sector participation we are seeing is increasing, and that's the shift toward your public-private partnerships. What it is doing is it's enabling faster, more efficient development and maintenance of water infrastructure, which is very important at this point in time. But we also need to look at natural resource management, which we are seeing is becoming better. There, the focus will be on protecting strategic water source areas, whether it be groundwater, whether it be the integrated vol that we are seeing. And also, we are seeing some municipalities implementing stricter tiered pricing for water to curb high consumption rates. You also see within the Western Cape, the city of Cape Town, increasing water tariffs and proportionately to try and cover the gap so that more investment can go into our infrastructure. But those are the positives. But we are sitting with major wicked problems across the country, whether it be rural areas still not having water access, still not having safe drinking water. And then also, if we look at the water quality across the country, especially our rivers, dams, streams, etc., they are getting polluted at a massive scale. And if we are going to address the water quality, especially, we're going to have to focus on our wastewater treatment works, try to cover the gap, whether it be skills, management practices, whether it be the infrastructure itself, that we need to give major attention to, because that is where your silent killer lies. You can see the water availability shifting across the country, but water quality is a complete different monster that one needs to deal with, because in some instances, water sources will look like they are safe and clean. But if you look at the quality itself, you're going to magnify that. We are seeing that our catchments are losing buffering capacity, meaning that it's not able to absorb wastewater and pollutants to such an extent as before. And that means that our environments are getting degraded to such an extent where they won't recover. So yes, we need to look at our infrastructure. There's very good positives there, structural reform we are seeing, but we need to, for me, I would like water quality to receive more attention. And that ties into your sanitation as well. So hopefully with the implementation of technologies, increased awareness for communities to know that the water is not safe, and try to adjust their own behaviors to make sure that we don't pollute our water resources anymore.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our interview. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me about this important topic.
Thanks, Nontobeko.
Our conversation has highlighted that water security is deeply connected to public health, economic development, environmental sustainability, and the quality of life of millions of people. As we have heard, addressing South Africa's water challenges will require strong governance, improved infrastructure, greater public awareness, and innovative solutions that harness the power of technology and data. While the challenges are significant, there is also reason for hope. Advances in technology, including AI, offer new opportunities to improve water management, detect problems earlier, and support smarter decision making. However, lasting progress will require collaboration between governments, researchers, communities, businesses, and individuals. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this important discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with your networks, and continue the conversation about how we can build a more water secure future for South Africa and for the African continent. Until next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye.